Hello. Let me do some
Hey,
that music. 1 second.
you should keep playing it, man. That's your birthday time.
I did have a launch party of the precursor to my current project at Doug Engelbart's house many years ago, and we played the '68 demo on a projector on the wall, listening to trance music all night.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, that was a good moment.
That's great. Well, I thought I'd join a touch early just to say, hey, happy birthday.
Thank you. It was a nice birthday. It was warm during the day, but the weather here is odd. It's really hot during the day, and then it gets cold. It hasn't settled yet. So we sat around fire pits and had a good time. So yeah, lovely. One of the key things is two of the other fathers from friends of Edgar at school showed up because there was supposed to be an event. So they just came over. One of them so drunk he could hardly walk. And I noticed two things really struck me. Number one, they really are much younger than me. It's like the manner of which we get drunk. You know what I mean? It's not a bad thing, but there is a difference between a 55-year-old and a 30-year-old. I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know even in what way. It's not even a bad thing. It's just weird. And the other thing was,
no,
I'm
I
so
get you.
grateful that Edgar has friends with parents like that. Well, they're all very different. Many in financial industries and very little to talk about. They care about sports, but proper human beings or properly present. So yeah, it was. What is this? Messages nonsense. Yeah. So that was nice. That was a treat.
That's fantastic. I um I wonder about that at times, the child creating of a legacy, etc. I think it's uh yeah, too late for me, but
No, you're
it's
not. How old are you?
45.
It's not too late for you.
Well,
It's
it's
not. I'm 55, as you know, because I've been saying it all last week. But Edgar's 6. I was 49.
hmm.
The mathematics work. Just how old is your woman friend? Your married wife.
She is younger, but it's not a thing that it's not on our to do. I've never
No,
woken up with a burning desire to have an offspring yet.
yeah,
Might change.
no, that's fine. We came around in the oddest ways. Hey, Leon.
Hi, Frode. Hi, Ellen.
Oh, you're
Oh,
very frozen or very serious.
Oh, yeah, indeed, I'm frozen. Not sure why. Let me stop and start. Is this better?
Yeah, that's good. You are obviously too young to have kids, right?
Well, thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, and it is kind of an interesting thing, and I think that it's not that you get a deeper perspective on life or anything nonsense like that. But one thing that I have noticed is a lot of people who write all kinds of sciencey stuff of the evolution of mankind and psychology. If you don't have kids, the early years you see different if you remember your own. So that's one area where I think, hang on a second, what are you writing about? Hello, Fabian's upper head.
Hello, hello. How are you?
Hey, Fabian.
We're good.
hello.
We're good. So,
I certainly see where you come from with that, and even though Louis C.K. is on the outs, there's one thing that he said along those lines where I mean his comedy completely changed after he had kids.
right. Oh, right. Yeah, it does change. By the way, I picked this up today. Ha ha ha, revenge.
The myth of mirror neurons.
Uh-oh. They're busting the myth of mirror neurons. What are we gonna do?
Yeah, it's a bad title, but it's kind of an engaging book, and I haven't started underlining it, but there is, the sensory grounding. One of the things that if they have this story here of someone who woke up one day and he couldn't feel his body. His muscles could move, but he couldn't feel anything. He has no perception, or that fancy word that Brandel uses. So because of that, he functionally cannot move. You know, have to look at your feet to make sure they're moving the right way. So it's moving towards the thing we've been discussing for a long time, how cognition lives embedded in our brain and our bodies. But the thing it moves into, I haven't read yet, I'll give you a report if it's interesting. Where do we understand a framework for conceptual knowledge? And such goodies. I was going to get that textbook that's been discussed on Twitter, text visualization. It's £130. Come on, people. If it's good, it's good. But some of the Amazon review says it's not in color. So it's a print on demand. I went to bookshop and they said I have to prepay. Yeah, I'd like to see it first, please.
This is the PDF. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also in PDF, which is nice.
Yeah.
But of course, you all have the Tufte books, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The irony of the Tufte books is they're really hard to read. They don't have any real chapters. They don't have any real flow. They're just ridiculously beautiful. Bit bizarre. So here we go. Hey, Peter.
That's true.
Hello, brunching with mom, so I have the camera off today.
Yeah. Are we all going to be able to sit still while we're waiting for Macworld, or rather Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, as it's called now?
Is it going to be all that exciting?
Oh, it's going to be a massive letdown.
Okay.
But it's going to be the first release of air about what this is. And then we can start looking at where it's going. Like, you know, you're wearing an Apple Watch. In the beginning, that was a bit of a joke, everybody thought. Even the iPhone, when it first launched, everybody wanted an iPod phone. But it was so under this and that. Apple are really good at finding out what people want and really building for it. So at least today, I think us in this community, we will find some of it hugely impressive, some of it, oh my God, I can't believe they did that, but it'll be real.
Maybe we'll be really, really surprised, and the device will actually be a headband that will externally stimulate our visual cortex with electromagnetic fields, and we can just close our eyes and we'll be in the alternate world.
That will be an incredible waste of neurons. By the way, talking of very close to what you said, so birthday, lots of wine and nice things, but one of my friends got me this. How cool is this?
Whoa.
Transparent.
Someone who knows me well.
That is wild.
Crazy.
So you just, if I recall correctly, you just stick that into some ice and the Fortress of Solitude kind of grows up around you. Is that
Nope.
correct?
Don't say that in a public forum.
Actually, so just it's not the same, but that's my business card that I etched at the Parliament a couple of weeks ago, and I put on it the what's the name NFC chip, because it costs nothing and then you can still interact with it. But what you showed me, Frode, made me think I could also etch in there, and then I think I brought it downstairs, but I have some conductive paste. So I could actually like draw a circuit, and then if you put it somewhere, let's say a battery here and LED there, then you could activate it. Not you want to have like a whole fortress, but you have turned on LED somewhere else.
I've been wanting to use this after Brendel posted that Second Life video. That was the first I'd heard of strain gauges, and I would love to tinker with strain gauges as a kind of NFC on steroids, right? Rather than just tapping and activating an API endpoint, like if you hold it, you're indicating I want the action to continue, right? So like the equivalent of like, you know, putting your phone down or putting something down on the strain gauge, and then that starts an audio recording and you just move it to stop the audio recording. Like that'd be fun.
Talking of which, you're so annoying with those inspirations, Alan. That was a really cool thing, and I'm going to say something about it. But first, something private. That's not what I meant to do. I meant to pause recording, not mute myself. And that's the secret of the universe. Anyway, let's go back to recording. Yes.
42. Wow. It's a side point, but Skunk Works is an interesting, book about military, the Lockheed brain factory, I guess, that made the stealth bomber. It's just the story of stealth. And so what's interesting though is the culture that's all around it. So to the point of like, if it's late, don't, forget about it. And the quick detail about stealth, which is interesting, is the big invention is that they figured out how to make the stealth bomber as small as a ball bearing on radar. And what I didn't know about that is that they didn't figure out how to do it themselves. It was actually one of the engineers or something read a Russian scientist's paper on radar, and like based on this, the scientist was saying, we could like reverse engineer the effects of radar, and the Russians weren't interested in it at all. And so when it was finally translated to English years later, they snapped it up. Anyway, it's wild military stuff.
There is a related tale that I think was in that book, and it's written by Ben Dover, wasn't it? Wasn't
Yes.
that the alias he used when he was traveling, Mr. Ben Dover?
I haven't gotten to that part. That's hilarious.
There
Ben
were-
Rich is the author's name, but
Yeah. No, I think he did use that. But the
That's great.
thing, I think I read it there. I may misremember. That was when they finally developed a stealth ship. It was off San Diego. Couldn't see it on radar. Great success. Then it started raining. Suddenly there was a black hole on the radar because there was nothing reflected. Everything else had undulations.
wow. Oh, I haven't gotten there. Wow,
Isn't that fascinating?
that is.
So,
Wow.
sorry, what was that? What did the rain do?
Because on the radar, the rain creates noise. So the radar screen became a bit noisy, but where the ship was, there was nothing. So it was just like this empty area.
Oh, really? That's hilarious.
That is wild.
Brilliant.
It really maps onto the color argument that some of us have been having recently, because as we've been reading in some of the books lately, the human eye, the background is not blank. That's why when we're in an urban environment with just lots of blank things, it's not good for us. It is actually foliage, trees, grasses, and stuff. So that level of complexity, this is in Annie Murphy Paul's book, amongst others, is what we need to have kind of a baseline. That's the complexity that we process best. So
Say
that's
that
why
again?
the thing where a friend, it's my understanding of this starts with a friend talking about video compression for the military for teleconferencing way back was not based on a default black screen or white screen, so to speak. It was an outline of a human. So the compression was based on knowing there would be a human shape. So the kind of default processing can be based on different things. So the human eye, the level of complexity that makes it work the least, that is most relaxing, is being in a forest. When you look at a tree, it's kind of relaxing in a nice hippie kind of a way. You're just there. Even though, of course, you're not really processing it, because if someone asks you afterwards to even draw the main outline, even of an oak tree, you're not going to remember where all the trunks and everything are. So there is something really interesting about how that becomes our default. And Leon, you were also seeing these emails. Yeah, so the idea of color coding for understanding really feeds into that. It's not designed to be legible by itself. It's supposed to be the beginning of experimentation to have environmental cues. So it's going to be very...
That's in the extended mind?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's in the extended mind, yeah. And I think that very much relates to some of Adam's experiments. See, now I'm forcing him to speak.
A slight deviation from that. If you haven't seen Tim's Vermeer, I would highly advise it or suggest it, whatever.
What did you say? Tim's Vermeer?
Tim's Vermeer is a documentary about an inventor who happened to be friends with Penn and Teller. So Penn made the documentary, and he comes up with a theory about how Vermeer painted. I won't ruin it, but it's really wild, and it really makes the mind tilt about our capacity, like how our body sees versus how mirrors see, you know, and to an extension, how AI sees. So, yes.
Interesting. Yeah, Fabian.
Topic for time. Also very similar to Borges, Millard's Quixote. Paul Menard, rather, I think. Fabian.
Yeah, I'll share my screen. It's because it's something unrelated, but I don't remember the reason. We had a couple of meetings recently. Ah, yes, of course, we had presentations, but I did a couple of experiments that might be interesting. So I'll briefly share my screen. Let me know when you can see it, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. So some of you are already familiar with the environment where I put text in 3D and in VR. Some of you already might be familiar with what's called nodal programming, where you basically, how can I say it? You have objects, and each object has, for example, an input and an output. And when you get them close together, they connect. And if they connect, then the information can flow from one to the other. And basically, I had one text editor, which is the thing here with that's why I thought of it, the syntax highlighting. So this is JavaScript here on the bottom right, for example. And when there is a function name, it makes a certain color. When there is a string, another color, an operator, another color, a variable, another color. So it makes it easier to read for code, at least. Most people agree with that. And I don't remember what started it, but instead of having one editor, let's say this one, then I started to have two. And then when I had 2 or 3 editors, I thought, oh, I can connect them one to the next. And then if I can connect editor, then I can use nodal programming so that this function on the top left has only one output. The function in the middle has an input and an output. The function on the right has only an input. So the function on the left makes a random number. The function in the middle squares it, and the function on the right shows it. And you can see the result here. So all those can be grabbed when you're in VR, moved around. And if you, for example, make this node further away, then they're not going to be connected. And here you will have nothing, for example. So yeah, I'm not sure. To be honest, I made it because I could, not because I have a specific interest in nodal programming. But it's also a question that was recurrent when I showed the little thing, the environment to program in VR, to read text, to modify all this. Then it's a question people asked, and I thought, well, we need to see how long it takes, and it was basically not too long, a few hours. But yeah, that's been added recently.
Just aesthetically speaking, that's beautiful.
I admit I like it. It looks visually it's pleasing, and it works also, of course, in AR, so you can have your physical desk functions, whatever you want there.
But Leon has a question or comment, but quickly, Fabian, do you have a link for us to try it in AR? I would love to do.
Yeah, it's the usual. It's live. I think if you.
Oh, okay.
If you go there, and I think the code, I'll link to it.
Thank you.
It was interesting also because it brought me back, let's say, to the foundation of programming, where basically you have you have code, but how do you run it? So you need to basically have a graph of dependency. This function depends on that other one, and then you have a stack of functions that you need to execute one after the other. So that was this implementation is pretty basic, but enough to do something. So again, that for that part, that was interesting.
Wow.
I'm typing this in, so Leon, please, and Alan, please don't wait for me or any nonsense. Sorry.
Yeah, I have a quick question, Fabian. First of all, very cool. I'm surprised that it was so fast to implement, because it could have been the opposite. And my question is basically, is this more like interactive, create a graph on the spot, or do you also see possibilities to maybe export or import some kind of textual representation of a graph? As far as I know, there are a couple, like for example, the GraphViz. Maybe you know about it. But yeah, I was just curious about your thoughts.
Well, yeah, again, to be very to be honest, there was not a lot of thinking. It was like, I can do it. I'm rather confident something interesting can come out of it, but there was not a lot of forethought in terms of GraphViz and graph in general. Yes, I tinkered with it, and to be honest, for the same reason, people were like, why? Graph is sexy. It's like when you want to show something modern, let's say, you show a graph of it. Well, that's not very complicated, so I'm just going to do it. So I have some of the wiki. You can see it in 2D, and you can also see, like I said, some, because if you display 1,000 nodes, it starts to become both in terms of performance and cognitively, it's a bit overwhelming, basically, or unusable, to be less diplomatic. But yes, not GraphViz, but it's something I mentioned a couple of times here. It's I forgot the name. It's a JavaScript library also, but where you can basically do graph analysis, when you see if the graph is connected, fully connected, if you what is the most connected nodes, all these kind of things. So. But in terms of importing and exporting, I did not do that yet. But that should not necessarily be a problem. It would be definitely interesting in the sense that, for example, if you do this in 2D and you have your, and I showed a remarkable, but I just ordered yesterday yet another gadget, the Pine Tab, so a Linux proper tablet. And I try to have this Octopus or offline first Octopus where all my devices are connected. And I want to be able to basically sketch on the remarkable or highlight a node, move it around, and then have it from one basically interface to another free. So for sure, it's something I will have to do, but I haven't done it.
So I was just there. I saw it in first VR and then in AR. It's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. Simply. It's so clear and simple. The only thing that I'm highly critical of, and that is really, really bad, is the working screen is actually so clear that I was about to destroy my monitor by trying to touch it and putting my hand through it. So that's a serious downside, but that was what VR should be. You know, that kind of visualization. It makes no sense. It doesn't have to. It's the mess of the author. I could see you wanted to do this. It's not following a specific thing. It just lets you think. I suggest if you have headsets nearby, please have a look, everyone. Just go to our Future Text Lab website. It's linked from the bottom. Very, very cool.
One quick thing that I wanted to do though, and I did not implement yet, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, is that if you have a 3D model and it just sits there, which also brings me back to the presentation of Leon last week. I don't want it to just sit there and be a visual. I want it to do something, for example, record text, or here having a function, and then so basically to be able to when you click on it, display the node associated to it, and eventually how multiple objects are linked together, just like people who work in audio, they're used to it, like nodal programming, I guess historically comes from there, where you had your mix table, when you had the different input and outputs, and you just take a physical cable, not like a virtual one or node, and then, or an edge rather, and you connect the nodes together. So that's something I haven't done, but I'm pretty excited for, especially for the workshops to kids I give, because the text floating in space, they get and they're able to manipulate, but how one piece of text might be linked because it depends on another. They haven't actually seen it, and the whole, let's say, advantage of using VR is to show things that are not visible otherwise. So I'm pretty excited by the ability that it should be easy of having a bunch of 3D models there, and each of them having both the text that will be coded to change their behavior, but also how they can be then linked together.
I saw the Brett Victor video that you linked to, and of course that relates to what you're talking about. And this thing here, I love touching it. You remember probably the story of the original Palm Pilot. That was basically a book, and the original iPhone was a physical model. We have so many USB sticks, and I mean, look at this SD card, 128 gigabytes, didn't cost very much, and it's that size. You know, to have something tangible. So then I'm thinking about a basic invention that I just came up with. Imagine this size memory thing, but it's only Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, whatever. But it's only really connected when it's on a QI charger. So it becomes, when you put it on that charger, it is now live. You know, so it maybe has a small battery, so if it goes off for a second, it's not like you're going to lose connection. But the physicality that you're talking about, I really, really like. Because again, I use these as my negatives. I don't take these off and erase them. I keep them. They're my negatives. We've lost the sense of physicality. To have this thing does that and that thing does that is really important. Now, the thing in Brett Victor's thing was, of course, really, really impressive. The way you had these little, hi Keith, we're talking about a Brett Victor thing using projectors, but he has these little cards on the table with a color coding, so the camera can read where they are and project the information. It's very impressive, but it's also ugly in my mind, to my aesthetics. I'm not imposing my judgment. I'm just saying that to me, that was distracting. And Keith, you probably agree with me, being a designer and a typographer. But the whole idea is really, really important, of course, to bring it back up. Keith, I'm going to paste in chat here a link from what Fabien just showed us. Do you have any? Well, you do. Right behind you is one of your headsets. I can see it. If you want to have a look, Fabien has just built a kind of amazing coding environment for VR and AR. So it's just kind of fun. And it leads into the bigger discussion we've been having for a long time about spatializing stuff, which of course relates a little bit to the color coding thing, which may or may not be relevant.
I have a comment on that.
Yeah, please.
Me?
Yeah.
All right. I will share. I wasn't going to do this, but I'll share. I've been doing an experiment with my own VR, but the idea is I wanted to see what it could be like if I went totally analog. If I didn't go through the mental frameworks of how to code this or even how to type it. I've been trying to avoid all the things that are possibly lock-ins in our ways of thinking. And that went all the way down to typing, and then it went all the way down to pages. So what I've started doing is writing, I don't know if you can see any of that, but kind of like writing my notes just on a scroll and completely open-ended. And I realized, you know, pretty early on, this is how I would want VR to feel, you know, where I could just have this kind of canvas of associations, and there didn't have to be, I mean, in this case, there is a schema in the sense that the farther back it goes is the farther, you know, it's a calendar of sorts, right? But it's been very liberating. First off, a totally different feeling than a journal. It makes no sense. It's not for others, but it's it is like what I would want VR to feel like, I think, you know, this mix between imagery or links to ideas. Yeah.
Really important. But first of all, I want everyone to just confirm that this is Monday, June 5th, but it is before the Apple announcement, just for the record, because we're talking a lot of cool things. Say yes. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I think you're absolutely demonstrating the dream there, Alan. I mean, the reason I love my Apple Watch is the same reason I love the idea of headsets. You get extremes of where you need the digital to go and digital to go away. And one of the things we have talked about that is so compelling is having whatever devices understand your non-digital stuff. You know, like the resolution, this one here on the normal iPhone 14, it's 40 megapixels, extremely high quality, right?
Right.
All kinds of devices are going to have that. So for you to do what you're doing and have that read, well, all of these are kind of obvious and kind of possible. But I think what our community can help with is, so Alan's been working on this on a desk or on a wall or whatever. Maybe his normal glasses have a camera. I don't know, but the digital system now knows what that is. Then what? If you make a modification to the paper, can be updated, but also one of the big things about my own visual meta is, of course, you can copy as a citation, right? So imagine if it knows what that item or thing you had. So if you move that somewhere else, it will remember where it came from, right? That's one.
Right. I would love to print stickers that I could like print, and I may do this, print QR codes on, and then just control the endpoints and start putting stickers down at various places on the scroll. So I could, you know, in VR perhaps look at the QR code, like the idea from a few weeks ago, and jump into the digital equivalent or the update, you know, like if I reference a book and I put a QR code next to that book, then maybe I jump into where all the rest of the notes are for that book. So a mix would be great.
I say there, and I'm handing it over in a second, but I just wanted to say that I would like to see both more interaction thinking and infrastructures thinking, because in a way, VR and AR should be irrelevant. It should just be in the environment. How it happens shouldn't matter. But once we
Right.
get to that point, I'm so worried about Apple and others owning so many of our things. That's the concern. Yeah, Leon, please.
Yeah, so Alan, I have a question. I would be the first one. First of all, I would be the first one to use something like that, because I think I'm sort of in the same boat here.
Yeah.
So what I also like about this big form factor is that I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, everything has to fit on one page. And I can also leave mistakes as being a part of a bigger story. I kind of like that, because then if I would start a new page and I would read that later, then I wouldn't remember why I got to that point. So I really like that. But I'm very curious. Have you also been thinking about whether it should not be possible to move some sort of cluster, move it elsewhere, because it might break the whole, you know, story or mindset, or would you maybe perhaps duplicate it instead of moving? Have you thought about those things?
Yes, I'm definitely keeping track of the pain points, right? And it is painful, you know, like some of the pain points are those are for sure, you know, like I want to be able to almost lift a thing off of the page, treat it as a loose entity that could just be a set of relations, right? And I can't do that. And there are times where I'm referencing the same book and I want to be able to just have the book in one place and maybe, you know, have this long arrow go back to the first time I mentioned that. I started doing a thing where I was putting a code next to all the books I mentioned so I could just refer to the code, you know. But yeah, those are problems. Another real problem is and I've played with this some, is the graph syntax, if you will, for lack of a better term, right? Like I've been doing this with slight in mind that I could take photos of it and I would have my own model trained that it could look at the symbols that I've put next to the words and kind of from there grok that, you know, like for instance, if I do an underline, that means it's a book. if I do a line to the left, it means it's an author or a person. If I do a line to the right, it means a concept, and then other things like that. So it's definitely making me aware of the things that I miss and that I would like to see. And I hope that would come into play in the actual feeling of a VR AR experience, right? That I could mitigate that, or that I could just look at this with AR and see a layered version of it.
Ooh, that's also cool.
Oh no, Fabian. Okay, go ahead then. I'm too excited, but you okay? Fine.
You're excited because I'm going to say something, or?
No comment.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate. First, a little comment is I definitely think this kind of exploration is very valuable. And of course, I imagine most of us think right away like, oh, but it's too heavy and it's cumbersome. And like, it doesn't matter, because even if it is, or all the, how you say, limitations make you cherish the alternatives even more. So I think it's valuable for this. And even like, yeah, you rethink, okay, why do you actually use the alternative? Why do I get stuck in this piece of software or whatnot? So I definitely think that's very interesting to try. One thing, comment also on what I understood you struggle with, and what Leon also was asking, was pointing out to past content and eventually embedding. I mean, the usual problem or what we tend to like. Yeah, if I understood correctly, with one role, you have an absolute horizontal position, which seems right now to represent time. So what is this closer to the beginning of the page? So I think the rightest at that point is the origin. So it's, let's say, 0.0, and you can use whatever, let's say after 1 meter, after 2 meters, but basically you can reference back based on this. You say, okay, it is 3 meters from the beginning, it is 50 meters or whatever. So you have an absolute position to reference back, and then vertical position if but I'm not sure it's required, because you can glance at the whole page like this. So maybe that could be something to try.
Yeah, exactly. A couple of quick points on that. The fun thing is, because it's, there's no overhead for changing up the design, little micro schemas are evolving, right? So like the date is at the top, that's no big deal. I found that my ideas tend to float to the top, so I just move them up there, and book references have been floating to the bottom. So it makes it a little easier to go like, okay, here, with all this mess, there's more of a chance that a book reference will be at the bottom. But, and this is the one thing I want to say, that the thing that's odd to me is that's sticking out is entities, books, authors, things like that are, of course, you want to reference them again, but I feel like that's the totality of what TFTs focus on. And the things that really go missing are the things that escape search, the things that aren't entities. And it's the weird associations where I've just been drawing this thing over here, and now because they are already local to each other, I connect the dots, and that leads to some other kind of thought. And those things don't have a name, right? They're almost like the product of mnemonic possession, or they're the playfulness of the mind, twisting around. And so they aren't entities, they aren't schema bound, right? Those are the things that I feel like are often lost in blogs and in digital formats, right? Like, how do we identify those and even like search for those? The closest I could come up with would be a metaphorical search engine, or a search engine of metaphors in action.
It's exciting to hear you all so much agree with one of Doug's key things, which is publishing to a journal and it's frozen. And obviously that's why I like PDF, because it's there and it's done. Because I assume that not one of the main interactions on this scroll of paper would be erasing. It would be literally ink and adding to it, then kind of with scanning.
Yeah, no erasing.
Yeah, so you kind of get versioning there, which I think is very, very nice. So written a couple of notes here, and one of them is Yeah, so when this is scanned, imagine, do most of you either have or have access to a printer that's larger than just a normal size? Right, so imagine if that was normal, you had a relatively large scale printer, and what you would do, you would print, and it would print out the date that it was printed. That would be there, so it's for this use, and maybe your name or some basic stuff, a little bit. So when it's scanned, you don't have to remember to put down the date because it was already there. So when you then use this, interact with it, whatever, at a certain point you're done, and it'll continuously be photographed from whatever device. I don't care at all, like we talked about. So then your final version would also be digital. How it knows it's final, I don't know. Maybe you put it into an old-fashioned type portfolio and it sees the ring binding on the side, but there's an action of creation and an action of finishing, which is physical and literal. Now, if you want to keep working on this thing, just print out another one because it's digital. It'll print it out in the same format, the same size. Everything is exactly the same. And it will have the history of it. So Moleskine, as we gave out as the student prize for Future of Text Volume 1, they have this notebook, I'm sure most of you know about it, where you have this magic type pen and you write on it, and it's also digital. That works because the paper has micro dots that are in a specific pattern, which is just crazy. It's a Swedish company. I don't know if you can hear me, Adam, so apparently there are some clever Swedes. Yeah, there we go. So the paper knows where the pen is. So there are many different ways, not just QR, but for the system.
That actually works?
Yeah, it works, right, Fabian? Yeah, it's ludicrous stuff. So, hang on. Yeah, and then of course we have, as has also kind of been in community, you have a page of a book, you do an underline. If it's important, then it goes into the system too, because the text becomes the address of the book anyway, because it becomes searchable in many ways. So we can talk about having a well-scanned life. So this physical.
Wait, so that last little bit, if I heard that correctly, that's really funny because I was thinking along those lines, like a highlighter where you could highlight the words and it would pick up the optical character, via optical character recognition, clean it up through ML models, that you would be extracting the text from the page as you highlighted it. Is that what you're talking about?
You freehand write, and it'll know you're drawing.
Oh yeah, okay.
And it'll know the page you're drawing the circle.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Moleskine thing, but I just always figured it was a marketing ploy. I've never tried it.
Yeah, no, I sent them an email saying, can we have a free one and give to a student as a competition? They said yes, and they wrote an article. And that's where I looked up a little bit of behind. It may be Korean, but I thought I learned it was Swedish. But the thing is, one thing that I think is so great about this community, a year and a half ago when I handed in my thesis for the first time, I was all about forget AI and VR. I don't have the brain space for it. But every time we look into one direction, it kind of goes in the other direction too. So now we're all excited about the headset today. So let's talk about paper, right? It makes so much sense. We need that mental freedom.
Agreed.
And
check out the wild.
I was hoping I would be able to show you guys the coloring today, but they are not ready. I only told them to start doing it Thursday night, so they are working on it. It's so exciting because when you talk about color, it's something almost everybody has an opinion on. So the email list is all about, Ben Schneiderman and all these people are commenting on it. It's really wonderful. And I'm just hoping that this is the beginning of a more direct discussion around what we've had for so long. Because what you're talking about, Alan, drawing a circle roughly is also color. It's a different kind of color. Or, we can call it texture if we want. But to finally escape having to, and with all due respect to Keith, who was very brilliant with type, to escape typeland will be very important, right? It can't just be, what's the name of that book layout guy, Keith? I think the German one, how to use type, and really famous, 30s or something. You're muted. Yes. Muted. Still muted. Now we can. Yes.
Jan Chichold?
That's it.
Yes, I can't remember the name of his book. Yeah, I mean, there are some really good ones.
Yeah, it's just, I'm just looking at what, yeah. It's just so important not to be too shoehorned. Anyway. I'm sitting next to a completely blank wall. I have a mirror higher up. Why don't I use that in the way that Alan's talking about? And I have a camera on my computer, so why don't I just every once in a while do that?
The new typography.
Yeah, that's it. Leon, please.
Yeah, I was curious. You were touching on the circle which Alan was drawing and color, right? I was curious, like, are we entering there the slippery area of what are symbols, what is color, and how it makes sense to us? Like, what were you talking about colors as in like blue, red, green, as in symbols, or could you go a bit, zoom into that a bit?
Very, very happily. Did you see / did I send you emails about some color stuff that I've been working on?
I think I have seen it, but I have not really read it or went into it.
So I mean two different things. One of them is literally just color. So in my software reader, I'm building this thing, and it's just a bunch of boxes that have predefined colors. And I don't let the users name the category, but for instance, in this example, anything to do with AR, VR is red, architecture is kind of orange, intelligence, augmentation, and knowledge work brown. See, these colors are supposed to kind of relate to each other. Then we have art in green, and then we have dark art and dark green, and so on. We have Alan here as a contributor to the community without having written an article. So thank you for being being a stand-up for that one. So the point of this is, Doug Engelbart told me many years ago, I think it was 2012 or 13, that he wanted to have a test where we took a document and we did this kind of color coding. So you could scroll through the document, and you could see when the colors change, roughly what's being discussed. It worked. We did it manually. It worked on a web page. It was fine, but it's horribly ugly to read. And plus, there are questions of what kind of vocabulary, overlapping words, different domains, all of that stuff. So last week, I just said, fuck it. I just have to try this. So it is invoked in two ways, and this is really important. And most people in the mailing list seem to have not gotten this point. I didn't say it well. Once you make this, and there will be a default set made by the producers of the software, us, for our books, the journal and so on, because that's our primary community. But the user can't change anything they like. If they want to have something about archaeology with different colors, do it. If they want to have just two single colors, one red for their own name, another one for a city they're interested in, fine. But the notion is that you see the colors only in one of two ways. If you do Command-Shift-K, it'll show you all the headings and all the color, if there's anything below it. Same view will happen if you fold the document into an outline. So you see all the headings, and if there are any keywords with that color below, you'll see it. So the idea is that you can quickly then get a glance, because our latest, so our journal, which is produced in two different ways. One is a roughly monthly edition. It's nice. We just did one, and it's all very lovely. It's a bit heavy. Some people insist on putting pictures in there. So I'm joking, but I'm saying the file size becomes so big we can't email it anymore, right? So it's a bit arbitrary. But we have an overview document that has every single article, every single transcript that was a presentation, not these ones. And it's 300,000 words. Nobody's going to go through that linearly. Plus, if they do, they're going to have to read my work first and then Vint Cerf, because we tend to write the introduction. It's stupid to have to be linear in the book. So the first thing we did, and sorry, I'm just going to share the screen here. I'll just go. a library, so I'll open, okay, let's say this one. You can all see, right? So let's say we have the word Zoom. So currently, if you do Command F for find on a selected piece of text, it does this. It shows you in the document all the lines that have the word Zoom. Plus headings are really light because they're not what you're looking for. So this was really the beginning of this. So let's just do, who's talking about friends, right? It's kind of useful, but if we do something like this, Command-Shift-N to see all the names in the document, that's a little bit more useful, but still you have to read every name, right? And if you do this one, Command-Shift-D to see all the defined concepts, it's also nice, but you still have to read them. So the idea is to do exactly that kind of stuff, but the text that comes up has colors. So if you only want to use a few, like I said, that's fine. But let's say you use it for a while and you develop your own vocabulary, like your stamp collection, you play with it over time. The difference between a light green and a dark green will mean something to you. And, you know, maybe even more subtle differences. And all these people who are experts in colors will be right. It may not work for other people, but it may work for you. And then I can imagine, because currently this is just stored in Reader as a preference, but if we have a mechanism, why can that not automatically go into Fabien's environment? So the colors that I'm used to, that work for me, the work that I'm doing there will be there, and that can be in terms of text, but also more ambient and kind of color shapes around the room. So that's why I'm beginning to get more excited about color, because it can break out of just this one test of colored text that everybody then gets into the usability and readability, which I think is missing the point. If it's pink and hard to read, that's okay. That in itself communicates to you. Thank you for that long speech.
That is very powerful, actually. I'm I'm really impressed, actually, because that can save so much time, and it can also keep readers interested in especially multidisciplinary bodies of text, because I think there is so much, let's say, so much neurons are wasted, and so many people give up on reading multidisciplinary stuff because they think, oh, this is beyond my, this is too much for me. I thought this was interesting, but now it's about math, and I don't like math. So no, this is not for me. And if I understand correctly, using this system, you can have a sort of a la carte version of one and the same document or body of text, and you can focus on exactly what you're interested in. Sort of a, it's not an algorithm, but it's basically giving you a subset of all the interesting. Wow, I cannot really summarize it as beautiful as you did, but I definitely see a lot of potential in this, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. It's using the PDF as just a substrate and hopefully getting out of the linearity of it. Because, and I see your hand there, Alan, I just want to say the goal, the frustration that's been for decades with me is text is fantastic, but it's awful at overview. You know, you just, unless you have an actual word that really describes what this body is, which for an editor on a system is hard to do, and it still doesn't differentiate from another one, how can we use more images? And one of them is just good old color. Alan, yeah.
Well, Ann, I wanted to comment on what you said there because it touches on, I mean, one of the reasons I started showing up to these meetings is like that touches on what I would think of as the future of text outside of VR and everything like that, right? So a simple scenario is, like, here's a very interesting book, right? We all had an experience where we started an interesting book, and there's a segment that, I don't know, in this case, she's in a plane and she's having revelations about things, and it just bores the snot out of me, and I never finished the book, right? if there was a different way that I could query this book, not just to summarize or fold, but to say, hey, tailor this to my interest right now, which is less of a narrative. I don't need an emotional plea, like just hit me with the facts, and then maybe I'll wind back into this personal story, right? I really do see that the future of text and the future of media could be something along those lines, right? Like choose your own adventure is a very cheap version of that. It's I say cheap only in the sense that it unfortunately trips over itself. The mechanism is so obvious that you never get into the point of being able to read or enjoy it, except as a novelty, right? But if say for instance it was just a common practice before you started a documentary series on Netflix that you said, I want this documentary series to be 30 minutes long. I don't want there to be any dramatic representations. Just show me the documents, and then it's automatically processed it for you, right? And you get to watch that version, which still has sources of truth and perhaps has more information that would be in the theatrical version. I'm all about that becoming where we go, which doesn't get in the way of a frozen form of the text. I think there would still be a large central hub, like every ebook is a database. And then there are just all these infinite amount of presentation layers. In fact, an accidental canonical version of a book might emerge as more people find this path to be more enjoyable than the one that the author intended, and it makes a different kind of experience even for authors who have to do this terrifying job of predicting the kind of path that their readers might want to take. You would actually get this really wonderful back and forth, right? So I see primordial versions of this just in Twitter, right? When you start out with a tweet storm or thread or something, and then people start to interact, and that changes, you're now it's a dialogue all of a sudden, right? I would love to see more of a study of whatever that is, right? Because it's not VR, even though I think VR makes it more possible. And it's not just artificial intelligence. I'm done.
I see Fabian has to go. I just wanted to say, Fabian, Max, who did the VR handwriting thing, he may be doing a presentation with us. He's in Bristol. He's not very far away from here, so that could be good.
Yeah, I'd love to try this. I only started to touch my fingers here, the feedback and all. I think there is a lot to explore there. So. But I got to run. So
Okay. See you.
Good luck for tonight. The presentation.
Thanks. Yeah, no, Alan, absolutely. And also what Peter's been talking about, the whole library thing. So imagine if these are on the spine of a book. They're just so small you can't read them. So effectively they're dots. So I think it'd be really interesting with the color experimentation, because if you have a lot of, let's say, blue and red dots, they will be purple. That's what happens when they mix, right? So you're going to get these shimmering effects of different colors, but they will have meaning to you over time.
Yes. And even shapes as well could fit in there, right? Like going back to the circle concept, right? Like the example brought up in the past is Paul Klee's pedagogical sketches, where this is his own developed private language. He has theories about it that perhaps there's some root to it, but regardless, this is how he thinks of curves and lines and arrows. It's a kind of meaning that doesn't have to be trapped into the letters. I think that's another exciting angle. Anyway.
So one of the interesting things about the presentation coming up today, it looks like iPad apps will work relatively easily in this environment. The one thing that I've asked the Apple technical team is if they can find, if it's possible in their VR set. I know it's not official, blah, blah, blah. But to generate if you from macOS had an opportunity from an application to generate not just a new window, but a new virtual display, that in itself could be insanely useful. Because that way I could have my whatever I want to write in at whatever size I want in a headset. But then the software developer, me, at low cost, can say, here's a huge one I put over here with this stuff. There's a huge one I put over there with that stuff. That can be really, really interesting if they let us do that. But it was only for iPad apps. Oh, God. Yeah. Anyway, so it's just going to be, I'm so scared in a way about what's going to be. It's going to be some of the most amazing stuff ever, and it's going to be some of the most constrained stuff ever. Sorry, Leon, you were talking about growing amount of, yes. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I was just thinking there's the only way to make sense of like this, let's say, content era where content is exploding and everybody wants our attention. I think the things Ellen was talking about and you are working on with the colors, I think it's almost inevitable from the content point of view. Because you might be, maybe everybody's like, oh, I'm fine reading text. I'm not really bothered by it, but I can really imagine that from a marketing point of view, these kind of new ways of consuming things have to, I think there might be competition. The competition might move to that, how we consume and not who can write the most content.
That becomes one of the really interesting questions about text. When you talk about consume, of course, there are many levels of consumption. One of them is skimming, where I think the color stuff. But when you really sit down and read, I think most people still prefer a book. And I think that's absolutely fine. We just need to figure out how that integrates. I'm not saying everybody should be on a virtual display when you're reading. It makes no sense. So how we do these kinds of connections that we've been talking about, it's just really, really exciting. And have it showing up in different ways.
Do you ever wonder if the AI will help us make just a new language so we don't have the international barriers, and perhaps built into those languages, that language would be non-printable characters, syntax for doing things?
I think that would be the death of humanity. I think different languages help us think different. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that a German's personality is different from a Swede or anything like that. May or may not be, but that's just not what I'm saying. What I am saying is I'm bilingual, Norwegian and English. I see things in two different sets. Doesn't really matter what they are. But so I think there is something fruitful to have a language, and I think it helps us remind us that language is a very poor way to communicate, written or spoken. You know, we have to do more. We can't just expect that there is a direct way of saying something from person to person, because also language will have to change over time, not just because of drift, but because context changes. And context is where language lives. So the fact that we are more awake to it is important. So I think that once AI tries to help us communicate, I think it's going to be awful if it is presented as a sentence, so to speak. But I think if it's more like a sculpture in many different ways, if it helps us understand the shape of the communication.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I mean, like the same goes for, you know, the idea of being taught Latin when that was common, is that you would learn to think, supposedly you'd learn to think more rigorously about what you're trying to say, right? So if there was if it might be a good thought experiment, if AI concocted a language that had the benefit of being able to program and speak simultaneously with the one language.
Well, I mean, one of the things I really want my son to learn is to climb trees. You know, I'm so excited by his physical understanding of the world, the three-dimensional thinking that has gravity, all of that stuff, to really get that ground into him. And also in his school, he has to learn handwriting. It's not just keyboard, right? So for him to live physically in the world as richly as possible, run around, kick a ball, basketball, hopefully he'll start playing. It's more three-dimensional. Really be in that. I think AI, specifically visual AI, can really help us when we get to a point where we have quite literally a shape of our knowledge, and you can push and pull, and the AI will actively suggest, while this, you have a transcript over here that because of this connection, you can see it maybe like sinews or whatever, stuff that we talk about poetically in this forum. But at some point soon, we have to start experimenting, to see what that is. And there, like Photoshop, filling in, not filling in, but outfill, when you make the picture bigger and it renders it for you. Very often it's crazy stupid, but it's also inspirational for what might be there. Same kind of ideas for, right now, Edgar 6, there are baddies and goodies. That's how he needs to process things. I really am uncomfortable with baddies and goodies, right? But that is a stage. Hopefully get to a stage soon where he will understand the complexity of things. And that's why I think AI should help us see perspectives rather than try to give us answers. Not that I think you disagree with that, Alan. It was in parallel, not supposed to.
Yeah. Agreed.
Keith and Leon, when you type, it's really nice, but the chat transcript kind of gets away from the transcript. So if you also speak things, it's cooler. So even if you've written it, if you speak it, that would be really good. Leon.
Okay, yeah, actually, I just wanted to talk about Keith's message on the chat that VR experiences are very spatial, very much about volume and space, and long form text reading isn't, not in the alphabetic representation of information. I have a question about that. Could you maybe zoom into that? Because I'm thinking that it's pretty weird, because you can also create or write down a story where you describe volume and space as well, right?
That's exactly what I meant by the alphabetic representation. If we're talking about the text as opposed to the words and the meanings and the thoughts that the text is encoding and presenting. So I could write a story which is all about 3D space and spatializing and everything, but the process of reading it isn't helped or enhanced, at least at this point in my understanding of what we can and can't do. I don't see a way that specifically moving it into a virtual environment would actively improve the process of reading. I very much want to be able to go into a virtual environment and read and see how that works and see how well it works and maybe how it could be improved. But it's like the home turf of VR experiences is about the sort of like that, it's depth. Whether you're actually interacting or not, it's about putting yourself virtually into a different physical, pseudo-physical, three-dimensional space and looking around and getting a sense of it. Whereas with text, what I'm reading is a two-dimensional flat container for the words, and the words in my head become the three-dimensional thing. But that's kind of like a distraction from the thinking, how does text work in VR? That was what I was thinking. It's just like, okay, that's because Fred, you mentioned something about reading long form or doing proper sit down reading in VR, which is different from saying, okay, I'd like to organize these pieces of data. And that's where the whole Minority Report, being able to move stuff and group it and link, becomes incredibly valuable. But it's not sitting down long form reading.
Well, text has always been, has for a long time, but not been flat. I mean, this is not flat because I can move it around. And I'm not being trivial or jokey about that. Many years ago at a Starbucks, I wondered why people prefer not to read on a laptop, but they read in a book or a magazine. So I did some counting of how many times the display was moved. So if you're sitting with a laptop, it's stuck, even though it's a perfect angle for reading. A medieval monk would love it. It's that kind of a setup. But when you're reading on a book, you're constantly shifting where it is in space. I can't remember the amount of times, but it was absolutely massive. So right now we are constrained not necessarily by the digital, but we are constrained by the physical screen thing.
Mhm.
So, also there's been dog earing, underlining, and all that stuff. But yes, Keith, I believe your main point is to really capitalize on the not potential, but the realizable multidimensionality of text is absolutely where we should go. And I think that's really hard for us to think about. And I'm very grateful for these discussions.
I do think, just a little quick aside, I do think one of the big problems with reading on screen historically had been the relative resolution difference. Reading more crude shapes, letter shapes, particularly like body text size on older screens before Retina class screens was I think that was a big part of where the problem is. And then when Retina class screens came in, that difference started to fade away. So I think back then, I think the problem was more about the relative clarity of the screen. Clarity as in resolution. Everything's sharp, but it's little blocky pixels sharp.
Well, you're the one who got me to buy the Retina screen because I didn't think I needed it for Photoshop. And it was your laptop, I saw it for text, and holy shit, I ran to Tottenham Court Road, and then lots of money later, I was happy. Yeah, no, that is an additional really, really important point. And that's one of the things with the head-mounted display today. So Adam, maybe it's going to come in audio, but I'm going to speak what's in the chat anyway. What he's done, he's built a few different reading things. One where in your headset, the text is floating in space as you might expect, and go to the next bit or whatever. It's really good. But he also experimented with something really stupid, which is therefore obviously very clever. Not having it float in space, but stuck to your head. So if you move your head, the text moves with you. Right? So if you want to lie back and read a book, you can do that instead of the text is still right there, like a HUD, which also becomes a very pleasant way to read. So depending on what you're reading, how you're reading, Alan, if you please read your comment about cooking and climbing. I think
could I just?
Yes, Adam, please.
But what I was posting in the chat was actually having the text in the hand. I did experiments with that as well, actually holding the text and letting it folding and following the micro movements of the hand was very rich for me. More similar to holding a book on page. So even moving it a few, millimeters in VR space, you saw that all the time, and it felt like the text came alive. So I think many things that come from the physical world can be translated into the VR world and make it come alive a bit more than just looking at a very static screen in regular screen. Yeah,
that is so insanely important, Adam. Thank you for that, because I have noticed if you want to show someone what's on your phone, you give it to them. If you hold it for them, it's going to be your micro movements, not theirs. That's really good.
Or rather, they take it from you. And I notice with my family, when they tell me, let me see, it always means taking it with the hands and move it around. So it's not just see, it's moving it about.
Were you here when I mentioned this book?
I only see half of it now. Let's see, myth. Yeah, I've seen it, I think.
There is a point exactly on this in the beginning, and that is this example of this guy who woke up and he couldn't feel anything in his body. And it talks about how you need feeling in order to act in the world, right? Which is very similar to this. And also, if perception is an act, it is active. We have with our binocular vision, we really need to move our head a lot, which we do, moving our hand a lot. There was an experiment where they put a kitten in a spinning wheel, so it can only go in a circle. And if it was allowed to decide on the pace of movement, its vision would develop normally. But if the wheel spun continuously, it would be functionally blind. It would never be able to see. So what you're talking about here is the really important aspect of being able to act on the world in order to get your perception, that has to be full circle. And yes, this is probably one of those things that AR, VR can hopefully help us with. Yes, Peter?
Yeah, one thing I'd like to see would be the ability to define my own gestures in VR. So maybe I could say that I want to have, my pluck and plop gesture, and then simply have the system have me repeat the gesture 10 or 20 times until it's able to build a model of what that motion is without having to try to textually describe the motion that I'm making. And then we'd be able to define multiple gestures and then associate scripts and actions with them. But it'd be nice if the baseline system had the ability to recognize and learn what some sequence of standardized movements are, and then be able to recognize them afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think Apple will do is let you use the Apple Pencil, iPad Pencil in VR, because it has lots of things in it, plus it's white. But, also specific pens. We talked in the beginning of the chat about this particular physical item and how I happen to love the physicality of it. So yes.
What is it?
Oh, it's an early iPhone chip, birthday present from a friend.
Oh, very cool.
It is, of course, it's entirely non-functional, but we have these incredible memory things that are so small, but they're so anonymous. So something more physical like this is more fun, even if it had the same storage. But also, a sculptor or a woodworker will use different tools for different kinds of cutting. Imagine if in your VR environment you didn't just have that or this, but I think hands will be great in VR, but it's also a bit insane. For most of human history, we've been making tools. Imagine if you have, 10 different pens or brushes or whatever for your VR environment, and the system knows the difference. So, they will have different effects. You'll be able to pick them up and use them. That will be really amazing. Imagine if Apple, as an example, because it's today, they open up an ecosystem where, like a Wacom tablet, but a Wacom pen for VR. You can have a different texture, can have a different function, you can set all kinds of things. That would be really quite cool. And then we could all have nerdy pens in our pockets again.
And pocket protectors.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
Side note on that, it's really interesting about the reading on the hand. A gesture that could be pretty useful is, if I'm reading the text here, but then there's, instead of going up and down the page, there's sort of information fuzzed out or zoomed back all around, right? And by turning my hand slightly, it's a suggestion of, I want to go that way, right? Like, so here's a point that's over here, and just read this, but tilting slightly brings that into view, and then I can straighten it back up, right? And I can do the same for this, like bring it down. So it would be interesting to have kind of pine cone version of text.
Who in the community developed a reading app where, depending on which way you tilt the phone, it goes faster or slower in a forward or backward direction? I think it was one of us.
Road, I believe, Brandel, right?
It might very well have been Brandel, yes, but thank you for confusing us. I take that as a huge compliment. Yeah, no, absolutely. By the way, this chat has been really, really good today. I look forward to putting it up and making it clear that this was done before the Apple nonsense. Clearly defined, clearly inspired by the fact that it'll happen, but not defined by anything actually said then. Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about now is, I thought I was a human-computer interaction person for most of my adult life, as Keith very well knows, having known me forever. But I'm an infrastructure person because I hate CD-ROMs. That was, to me, information ghettos. Anybody can make a nicely designed book if they have a visual sense. But now we need to make the tools to make that happen. And if you make one tool, it's still a CD-ROM. It's still a ghetto. I absolutely despise it. In my world, if someone else does it, it's fantastic. But it's just not me. So to make these things possible, yes, of course, I'm working on infrastructure with Visual Meta, blah, blah, blah. But the kind of thing you're talking about, reading in your hand, shouldn't you be able to, in an AR environment, also move it off and put it on the wall? And if so,
yeah.
where is it then? Right? So who owns the wall? Who owns your hand? Who owns the room setup? How can we leverage web technologies for this kind of stuff? And also, where are things relative? I think that semantic values for, and I wish Andrea was here, obviously, will become very, very important in VR, because I could imagine that you define one of your walls as main work wall, another rectangle, another wall could be pictures, etc. So it means you can seamlessly go between different locations, office, home, coffee shop, whatever. You put your headset on, and even though they may not be in the same place, where you put it onto your thinking area, in your home or your office, it'll be in your thinking area. So the question then is, when you pull it out of your thinking area and you do a thing with it, is it owned by the thinking area? Is it now owned by your hand, by your head, by your desk, by your laptop, by your headset? You know, these things are getting to be so incredibly interesting. The beginning of that is, of course, you open a physical style book in a VR environment, trivial. And then you decide all the pictures go up on the wall so you can see them all together. Where are they now? On a computer, they're on the desktop in a different app, you know where they are owned. And also, if it's a shared environment, and let's say Adam comes in and I'm having an argument with Adam, I'm annoyed at him. I don't want him to see everything. How do I define what is private and what is shared? Similarly, let's say Alan comes in and I want him to see everything. Can you take any of that? Or are you only seeing a visual representation of these things? You know, this is going to be kind of the key. And this is where I'm really worried about having Apple and Meta and them own this stuff. Yeah, Leon, please.
Very good points. Let me elaborate a bit on that. I would like to hear from Peter, actually, who last time talked a bit about antitrust, that a lot of these things, it would be nice if some antitrust would come in and then say, okay, Apple, this is not how we're gonna do things. I was just curious if maybe Peter knows anything about antitrust and text, because we had first we had this era of, you know, working with files are great, and then later we got this era of files are not cool, it should be in the cloud and you should not know about files at all. Yeah, I'm curious about whether Peter has any antitrust thoughts on this.
Well, basically the core antitrust analysis is to start with defining a relevant market. And then you look to see whether a player has monopoly power within that market. And one of the biggest no-nos is tying. Let's say that you have an effective monopoly on, well, let's see, it depends on how you define the market again. So if the market is cars in general, then no one has a monopoly on it. If you define the market as being electric cars, then there are far fewer players. If a player has a really, really massive share of the market, then antitrust analysis comes into play. And there are certain things that are prohibited, for instance, tying. And I think this is probably how we could go at Apple and megacorps like that are trying to control entire ecosystems. If you define the market as being their ecosystem, they're not allowed to leverage that to control purchases that aren't in that ecosystem. It's sort of like, imagine you bought a car from Ford. Ford couldn't require you to buy gasoline only from Ford gas stations. That would be an impermissible tying, because the market for gasoline should be different than the market for cars. And they're taking advantage of the fact that they control all Ford cars to try to force you to buy Ford gasoline. They're different products, and trying to tie the purchase of one product to the purchase of another product runs afoul of antitrust analysis. I think the way you get them is if they try to, if you can define the market as being the platform, then the creator of the platform has monopoly power on the platform, and you could make a tying argument that they shouldn't be able to control what secondary aftermarket products are used in that environment. It really hasn't been explored much, and we're seeing almost all of that work coming from an EU direction rather than a US direction.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It seems that the EU direction also goes beyond markets, like the right to be forgotten, or it seems more like personal rights, which are, yeah, I was thinking that applying that to text would make a lot of sense, because sure, you can create text in products, but if those products don't allow distribution of your text elsewhere, then yeah, I could also see that sort of violate some personal EU laws at some point. But yeah, definitely interesting. Perhaps antitrust started sort of product market related, but now the products become data and text producing.
Yeah, so the standard argument that winds up happening is the large player will say, no, the market is all other products in this vast category. Whereas the people who are using that player's platform will say, no, it's that player's platform. The relevant market should be the market for iPad apps, in which case Apple shouldn't be able to come in and say that you can't sideload something onto your iPad. But if they say, well, no, the market is all tablets in general, then Apple will say, well, if you don't like the fact that we won't let you sideload something onto your iPad, that doesn't matter, because you could buy an Android tablet, you could buy a Linux tablet, you could buy a tablet from these other things. So you get this strong tension of, is the market, the ecosystem built around the core platform providers technology, or is the market all technologies that could compete with that as being alternate platforms? Now, ideally, in the best of worlds, we'd have legislation that would require some measure of interoperability across platforms and enshrine some basic consumer rights of being able to take a program and move it from one platform to another, and being able to make sure that you can certainly move your data files from one platform to another. We're not in that world yet. Again, the EU approach is most likely to move us in that direction, because, of course, if the EU puts on some measure that says, no, you can't run your app store like you're running it, chances are everyone in the world will benefit from that EU regulation, because it would be easier than having Apple or someone start factoring out nation state level distinct app stores to be able to run under different sets of rules. It'd be easier to just go with the slightly more liberal approach that the EU wants them to take. So hopefully we'll get like spillover benefits in the US from antitrust action happening in the EU. Whether after the next presidential election we'll see a change in stance on antitrust enforcement in the US is an open question.
I'm sorry, I had to leave the room. I missed the middle for that, but I have to emphasize something. I know it's obvious, but I have to say, law is of course a reflection of society, even though it may lag behind. As such, it is a reflection of the people who are in a position to make the law, meaning people who have certain power. The problem with people who are good at being powerful is that they're good at being powerful. They may not understand other issues. Everybody I know who is a kind of a politician, whether in political politics or academic politics or other, that is their key thing, how to do that. So it is up to us who see a lot of these things as being important and obvious to experiment and let people experience what we're talking about. For instance, the really good chat we've had today about moving things around. There is no chance in hell that a powerful politician will understand that from a brief written outline or from the general notion of augmenting human intellect or anything like that. This is why we have to build stuff. And that's, you know, what Fabienne showed earlier today in that coding environment. It's such a great instantiation of that. So I'm very grateful that Peter's here. I'm very grateful for what he said. I just want to remind you, you know, having an imagination. There's a great book called The New Executive Brain, which talks about the difference between the left and right hemisphere. And it makes the point, according to studies, it's not creative or non-creative. That's not what it's about. But what it says that I think is so important is the left hemisphere is a bit of a slow learner. The right one is the one that tackles novel situations. So when you're learning to ride a bike, you're using both hemispheres, but you're using the crazy kind of disconnected right one in the beginning, which is why I have to concentrate. Slowly, the left one learns it, and then it's offloaded. But depending on where you live within all the different connectomes in your brain, you will see the world differently. Somebody who's a political person will see how things connect completely differently from us. So what I'm saying is that the imagination that we have the mental space to have, and the imagination in this group is quite phenomenal, is so unique, and we take it for granted. These other people cannot see it. Yeah, soapbox, step off.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Their power is in getting the seats and getting a seat at the table, but not necessarily reimagining stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and a tiny a personal side, the whole thing that I'm doing with this color thing for Reader, which is technically I'm spending not a lot of money to build it, and it's technically not very difficult. But I'm so excited about it because it's one thing that someone who doesn't understand our world can just play around with and have an opinion. They can hate it, and that's okay, actually, but at least there's something for them to hate. Because if they hate something, they'll have an opinion, they'll talk about it, they'll think about it. So I think that the more we do within these strong environments, even if it's demos like Apple's Knowledge Navigator, a lot of Brett Victor's work, it's really, really important. Don't forget, you know, the Starship Enterprise became the USS Enterprise, the real spaceship, right? Demos matter too, especially with imagination stuff. And, you know, Alan comes here and always blows our minds with thinking different and expanding things. You know, I've been doing the journal now for a third of a million words, and it's having very, very little effect, but that doesn't mean we have to stop. We have to just see what nuggets we get. And I think today's call will be one of the calls we need to highlight more. You know, final thoughts before Apple decides to do its thing.
3 quick thoughts. One, you asked about the cooking versus climbing. If that wasn't obvious, that's just that I keep how we actually wind up using VR is a little open-ended to me. I'm not sold on it exactly yet, but you know, and the why I'm not sold on it is that, like, there are actions we take, there are exercises that we go through, and we just naturally don't conflate the two. So we don't try to climb mountains and cook cuisine at the same time. You know, we enjoy the space that we have for cuisine, and that's for that. You know, we enjoy mountain climbing, that's for that. So I think about it may wind up that there's like a thing that is more natural to do, that feels right to do in VR, and it's not other things. It could still be that, like, writing is a 2-dimensional kind of experience, or, you know, creating whatever, and maybe even reading is a 2-dimensional experience, but grokking, parsing, twisting is this 3D experience.
I think you're right, but I think it's really important to ignore that half the time, exactly half the time, because we owe it to the rest of our species to think through and think into nonsense land.
Yeah.
So, half the time be logical, but also go against everything you just said.
Totally. Just like Isaac Newton believing in alchemy. I love it.
Yeah, well, maybe we will have a digital alchemy happening soon. It's been a useful chat, and the thing that I really had reinforced today, because we're supposed to end with summaries. I know we have 20 minutes to go, but we can still do a bit of summarizing. Is as more we move into cyberspace, the more physicality matters. And these things should not be further separated, they should be together. I remember the founder of a shoe company, I can't even remember the brand, some famous Spanish shoe company, he said that for a lot of people, luxury is getting away from nature. We feel luxury is getting closer to nature. So I think we can extend that into to really use what these artificial worlds offer. We need to move closer into who we are. Yeah, Adam, you're right about expense. Expense, and just to speak it out, Adam is saying it's been very expensive to do 3D text in physical space, reserving it for a specific thing. Yes, and it's been very, very difficult and expensive to move it as well. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys in the last 20 minutes to tell me one thing. Let's say that Apple announced, oh, please, Leon, go ahead with something else before I ask the thing. Oh, sorry, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was thinking last one thing based on what you said. I think you're absolutely right that it has to come from people like us, because if I look back at all these VR waves, they usually focus on a pretty maybe completely different experiences. For example, VR roller coasters. I have never ever thought about like, oh, I really want to do a VR roller coaster, but this became sort of a sort of big thing. And I have a feeling that the, let's say, normal use cases are not really, for some reason, they don't really end up at the table of these headset producers, etc. But yeah, once they get popularized or accessible, cheap as they are becoming, I think it would be really great if there's already some work done on doing, let's say, normal things. Let's say copy pasting text into spatial environments, etc. And I really have big hopes, but I don't really think that Apple will focus on these kind of normal, normal daily activities. I just don't see them doing that. So yeah, I think you're totally right. It has to come from people like us.
That really dovetails nicely into my question for you. And that is, if Apple releases a headset today or in the next few months or whatever, that is of a cost that you feel is worth it. The visual quality is phenomenal. It's just something you wouldn't question. You're comfortable putting it on, whether it's over your face or whatever, it doesn't matter. All of us here actually wear glasses. So let's not talk about the big chunky thing as being a limiting factor. Let's talk about the expectation that your normal knowledge stuff will be available. And let's say that and this is so very close to what Leon was saying, how would you like to work in it in a year? Just a year, that's not a long time. So you sit down and you're supposed to do a piece of work, meaning learning something and producing something. How would you like that to be?
Who goes first?
Random. Just jump in there.
Well, I have a really short wish. I just want to bring in all my files very quickly, whether it's from a USB stick or some kind of cloud drive. I would love to have some kind of file manager which doesn't only show what is on the device. And then, yeah, I would really love to just open these files and basically, just like a normal operating system, have them displayed, or at least the popular formats like PDF, etc. That if I could just, like you said, put them on a wall somewhere, and every time I put on the headset, have them available, that would be great, because my wife, she doesn't really like if I put all these things here on the wall, because it's aesthetically not that beautiful. And I could have a much bigger wall instead. So that's just a very simple request, what I would have, and what I would it would be useful on a daily basis, something like that.
It's really nice to hear that, because I think that compared to Meta, Apple has the stuff and they can let you do that. I don't know if they will or to where, but Meta doesn't own any of your work. It just owns your social life. And this is, of course, also why Google could do amazing work in VR that just aren't doing anything loudly. Alan, I think you were ready next.
Yeah, okay, so off the top of my head, what I would like would be to put on the helmet and or headset and start talking and seeing my text turn, my words turn into text, and then be able to say, okay, stop. And then perhaps without having to necessarily go point like this, but maybe I could just click, and with eye tracking, it would know that, okay, I want to select that text. So now I've selected that text, and then I want to be able to say, like, a range of things, right? Like add to calendar, right? For 4:30 on the 30th, or say like hold, and then I grab my keyboard and I change it and add stuff to it, but it's the physical keyboard. But primarily I'm working in this space without a keyboard, and it's a mix of really fine-tuned voice commands and voice to text, as well as an incredible infrastructure that doesn't exist today, where I could say, push this chunk, that maybe I have a variety of ways to select it, push this chunk over there to an email or to some calendar, but I'm not even having to really go into these different apps. Similarly, it's predictive enough that if I'm saying something, it can tell as a reference, that it would go through and search through my files and sort of pull it up on the side, so then I could open it up and begin to read that as needed. That's the kind of thing that would feel pretty great and probably better than a computer.
Thank you very much. Keith, Peter, Adam? Okay, Keith.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of thinking specifically what Apple is about to launch, I've spent 30 years learning the hard way through Mac user and everything. Do not predict Apple close to an announcement. Just a waste of time.
Yeah, just for the rest of you, Keith used to be Mac User's technical editor, so he does know what he's talking about.
Yeah, for a bizarrely long time. It was great fun. Yes, I mean, I would love to have a sort of a Finder extension into virtual space. So, like Leon, like you, just be able to manage my files, manage my stuff, put on the headset and carry on managing it. If it could become like an extension of my files and folders and how I work with that. And yeah, I mean, I think one of the big problems that I've hit, I spent the last year on a project with Meta, and I had virtual meetings every week, and they were great headset meetings. But working in VR with keyboards is a real pain in the ass. They're just not there yet, and I'm not sure how that can be made to actually work ever. So yeah, Alan, being able to do text-to-speech, text commands, I think that's going to become more and more vital, and that's what we really need. We need to be able to have a system that can reliably understand us when we just talk normally. So like next generation Siri, next generation, all of those things. Until we get that, it's always going to be clunky. If we have to rely on going back to a physical keyboard while in virtual space, that's going to be really clunky. So
For the record, they are really working on that aspect of the voice aspect, but also on the Quest Pro, I have no problems using the keyboard because it doesn't cover this. I can actually look down.
Mhm.
And that just the fact that it doesn't do it's just really good. Anyway, not my turn to
The Quest 2, you have to nose peek. You don't see enough. It's hard enough even to just check your physical notes while you're having a meeting. The Quest Pro, yeah, much better, but it's still it's like a real clunky hack in a sense. Although it does work acceptably, just about. It's still like you've got to have a bit of non-virtual space for your keyboard, your physical keyboard to sit in, because it just doesn't work in virtual space.
Fair enough. Adam or Peter, who's first?
Yeah, but I can follow. What I really would like to have is a way for some people to meet up and bring objects into and point to them. There are so many times I just want to point to things that I have close by or in files. I want to bring them in and point to them, to different aspects and small details. And it's close to impossible to do in Zoom. We try to hold up things in front of the camera and show it in the mirror, but it's so low resolution you don't feel it when you see it really. And it's not there. The moment you put down a book, I can't see it anymore. I want to stand next to you, you point to it, and then I can stand and look at it for a while longer. So that's a very important thing for knowledge work, I think. I want to meet Alan in a 3D space. We have some Zoom meetings on the side and here as well, but and we do lots of gestures, but the hands are not even covered by the camera, by the Zoom camera, and I feel that is a great limitation, and VR can solve that quite easily.
Says the man who's actually not even hiding his face, but fair enough.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely a worthwhile point. Peter.
Well, I would like to have the system be able to recognize other devices that are present in the room around me, so that if I had something being displayed on one of my iPads or I had another Mac open, I could grab something on the screen of one of those devices and through a VR gesture, move it over to one of the other devices and plop it down on that device. I'd like to be able to hold up a book and have the system recognize the book. If there's a barcode on the back, pick up the ISBN number either by OCR on the number or reading the barcode, and then have it pull in all of the augmented digital information associated with that book, so that the book would be an avatar for a bibliographic entry and anything else that I have stored in my personal knowledge graph related to that book. And then I'd be able to enter the book and turn into like an abstract data space. So basically the room would fade out, and then I would be in a Benedictine cyberspace representing all the data in the system associated with that book. Sort of getting back into my library's thought, highlight spines of books that I haven't read recently, or highlight books that had been commented on by someone who I'm looking into now. So for instance, say I want to know a little bit more about Adam as I walk into the library. I would like to have all of the spines of books that Adam's been working with, assuming of course that he's made an explicit preference that he wants the world to be able to access what his browsing history is related to books on whatever subject it is that he doesn't mind having publicly be available. Have all of those book spines light up, so as I walk through the stacks, I can see, here's where Adam had been browsing, and maybe even have them color coded. He started in this section, then he jumped over to that section, so that I can sort of implicitly follow his path through the literature by looking at the augmented highlights overlaid through AR onto the actual library that we're sharing?
So what I'm hearing from you guys is something really interesting, and that is the importance of bringing the physical room into the virtual room. So if we look at Keith's background, who's got the most varied background right now, if he chose to enter a VR room with us, but his room is rendered, forget AR, because that is just for him, that wouldn't be for us, then there's no reason why we can't look at his headset and wonder what model it is, or whatever it might be. That if he chooses to have the metadata, so to speak, for his items available, they are available. And I do think you're absolutely on something important, Peter, about the books. You shouldn't have to hold out any kind of a code. Any aspect of it should be able to find out what it is. And then, of course, if you touch it, you can do interactions such as saying, is it actually citing or related to any other books in the room or outside of the room? So to kind of repeat, the whole physical room you're in shouldn't lose value and disappear, unless you wanted to. Of course, that should be a mode, deep focused writing or reading. But to bring it in is important. And then, of course, equally interesting will be bringing some of this back out, plus the AR layers that people talk about, of having different things, having different meanings, having, it's going to be very different, I think, from what science fiction predicted when we finally get there. Yeah, I mean, that is one of the differences between, before and currently being a parent. How this will impact my son is really, really important to me. If it's one thing if it makes just an entertainment space, it would be a waste. But for Edgar, then I really get worried about what it'll be. But as I wrote in our current issue that some of you may have seen, I really think that VR will be what saves us from AI, and also makes AI more powerful, because if you have AI interacted only through voice or a small screen, you're kind of a prisoner to what it gives you. But if you can have, and this goes so much back to what we were talking about earlier, an environment where you interact with an AI and it presents information in a much richer, multifaceted way to you, you have much more control over what that information is. The screen is not necessarily physical. That's one of the, I know you're, okay, yes, Keith, talk.
The flip side of that would be that the richer the presentation of data, the more convincing it is, generally, regardless of whether it's true or not. So an AI presenting information could make it more and more persuasive by making it richer and more all-encompassing.
Yes.
Just the flip side.
No, absolutely. And this is why, and also my piece, I talked about the nature of education. Education has to teach us to question in a different way. Now you're not just questioning a book or an article or a human being, you're questioning an entire system. So if you're told that Alexander the Great was an evil person or good person or whatever it might be, we have to have open environments for you to be able to query, question, and see other versions of that, of who he was and what it is. And that is why I'm begging again and again for an open and connected ecosystem, because even though I'm a software developer and I'd love to make 1 million or 1 billion with my software, for the sake of humanity, it has to be in a highly competitive environment. Whatever data we have, anybody else should be able to come in and do something better, right? And let's look at an Egyptian pyramid. If someone has made an amazing experience, fine, go into that locked-in experience, nothing wrong with that. But from there, you should be able to change the parameters and say, someone else has made an Egyptian pyramid experience from 1945 rather than 5,000 years ago. I want to see that now from the same spot. That really needs to be possible. A fear of hi-fi, Alan is saying. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I like Edgar climbing trees. He has to learn the physicality in the world, and maybe the physicality will be reflected in there. Leon, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this fear, and I think Keith said something really, actually very positive, which I started to think about. Like if if everything is more focused about being an extension of things we already work with, extending files or enriching files we already have. Let's say a book, if you load it in VR, a PDF, you bought it, that suddenly it will show extra data, which might be embedded or not in the PDF, or maybe somewhere on a different server, it has some extension. Like I think that could be way more positive if we're thinking about children, etc., to basically enrich the real world. Could be much more positive than creating a completely sort of isolated experience, which is basically isolated from the real world. Let's say a World of Warcraft. I remember that a lot of students completely sort of failed their university because they got so caught up in this fantasy world, which there were like a lot of things to achieve, but they were not connected to the real world. So, well, if you ask me, I think Keith basically, yeah, he's pointing into a pretty positive direction there.
Apple has started their keynote. The music just came on. I just wanted to point out what Alan is saying here about imagination not being studied and so on. This book has some really nice bits on that. And yes, we do need to understand human imagination because it is so important. Basically, that's how we invent. I look forward to next Monday, and I guess some of us will be communicating during the presentation on Twitter or text or whatever. But let's just wish for the best.
Tell me how it goes.
Thank you for a really good call today. I'm very, very grateful.
See you next time.
All right.
See you next time. Bye.
Cheers.